One of the easiest ways to add interest to a rhythm is simply to move it. Let's take a look at the power of offset rhythms. Before I jump into this video, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. I've also launched the Prog School Discord channel. You can find the link in this video's description. It's just a fun place to hang out and talk about prog with me and some other people who really like this kind of music. I'm also available at the moment for some private lessons. I have a few openings. So if you want to up your prog and composition game, please consider hitting me up. This is a fairly simple idea. All you do is take a rhythm and shift where it starts either forwards or backwards. I put together this simple and pretty uninspired riff to demonstrate. This riff is based on a very common rhythmic pattern in rock and pop music, the 3-3-3-3-2-2 rhythm, which doesn't have an official Western music theory name, but I've heard it called the double tresillo rhythm. To offset this rhythm, let's move the entire riff back 1/8 note so it starts on the and of 1. A couple of things about this. One is that I'm keeping the constant quarter note in the hi-hat and the snare backbeat on beat 3. That way you can feel how this offset version of the riff interacts with the overall pulse. I'm also cutting the riff short at the end so it lines up with the downbeat when it finishes. This isn't always necessary, but sometimes when the rhythms get shifted around, the endpoints might need to be shifted as well. Lastly, with this particular example, I literally just shifted the entire thing over an eighth note in my DAW. If I was actually writing or performing this kind of offset rhythm in an actual song, I would most likely play it a little bit differently as I would be feeling this new rhythm against that quarter note pulse. Here's the original rhythm and the eighth note offset rhythm back to back. Rhythms can be shifted forward as well. Here's this riff starting with the original and then shifting forward to the and of 4 the second time. This doesn't work super well for this particular riff, but it's definitely worth experimenting with. Lastly, here's that same riff, starting with the original and then shifting it back 3/16 notes, starting in the of 4. This one sounds really cool. So there's a simple example of how to offset rhythms, but this technique can be done with any rhythm or musical phrase. Let's see how this would sound with a riff that everybody knows, except shifted up a fourth to avoid copyright issues. I'm going to call it Leader of Marionettes. I'll take the same approach here I did with the previous riff, start with the original, and on the second repeat it's going to offset back an eighth note. Once again, that constant quarter note and the snare backbeat will remain consistent. Notice how different this riff feels when it's shifted. All of the accents get moved, and it creates a very different feel. This is obviously a silly example, but it demonstrates the power this technique has. One more example with this riff. Now it's going to get shifted forward an eighth note on the second repeat. This idea isn't just for riffs in 4/4 though, odd meter rhythms can be offset as well. Here's another quick and uninspired riff I put together using a 5/8 rhythm grouped as 2/3, which I actually treat more like 5/4 by doubling that pattern to 2/3-2/3. Once again, let's do the exact same thing we did to the other riffs. Start with the original and then shift it back an eighth note the second time. I think this is even more effective when used with odd rhythms. There are certain cliche odd rhythms that can take on a whole new feel by simply offsetting them. Here's that same 5/4 riff shifted back an entire quarter note. This one feels really weird to me, but it's a simple example of how far you could take this idea. Sometimes you can use it just for a different perspective on a rhythm, and other times offsetting rhythms can create wild, maniacal, brain-twisting kinds of effects. So far, I've only showed this technique with some very generic riffs I put together, so here are a couple examples of how I'd use this in my actual music. First up is this riff from the A Sense of Gravity song, Reclusive Peace. This is honestly about as simple as this offsetting technique can get. I took the original riff and shifted the whole thing over 1/8 note the second time, and then cut off the last eighth note so it lines back up after 2 measures. Simple, but it helps this riff feel more varied and a little less generic. I used some offsetting rhythms in this Tigran Hamasyan inspired riff. This is all in 4/4, and in the middle section it's based on this rhythm as 16th notes. 2-3-2-3, 2-3-2-3, 2-3-2-3-2, or 6 groups of 5 and 1 group of 2. It's the same 2-3 rhythm from the earlier example, but spread across 2 bars of 4/4. This pattern plays 6 times with a remainder of 2, and that equals 2 bars of 4/4. What I do with this is to offset the rhythm back 1/8 note, just like I did in the earlier examples, but in this case I start with this offset rhythm and then go back to the original rhythm the second time. In this case, the offsetting is creating a different feel by contrasting it with that original rhythm. It also helps to obscure the 4/4 time signature even more because I'm not hitting the downbeat of that first measure, which was kind of the vibe that I was going for. The last example I want to look at is this. Here the main rhythm is in 6/4, 4 groups of 5 and 1 group of 4 as 16th notes. In the third bar, the rhythm gets pushed back an eighth note with a rest, and an extra eighth note gets added on the end to make a bar of 7/4. This is happening in the melody as well, which I haven't really talked about yet, but offsetting can happen in melodies, not just in riffs or rhythms. This throws off the feel of this melody to add that rest and shift it back. The offset here turns this from a straightforward 6/4 groove into something a little more interesting, and then at the end of the song, this melody plays in the simpler 6/4 variation, tying the whole song together. It's easy to get bogged down in complex odd time signatures and patterns, but sometimes offsetting rhythms is all that's necessary to create interesting and unpredictable grooves. This is a very effective writing technique that works in basically every style of music, definitely worth exploring in your own compositions. If you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share. Till next time, stay proggy.